The binary we are seeing right now is either a world that is still has a conception of humanity, you could say, and no, however imperfect it is, versus a totally lawless, rapist, genocidal, murderous, psychopathic Epstein class that is literally beyond any darkness I've ever seen in my life.
Iran's soil is sovereign. Once that soil is attacked, it is an attack on its entire people. There are innocent civilians being killed. An elementary school was bombed, hospitals, other schools, UNESCO sites, bridges, oil fields, gas fields. Those are all civilian infrastructure. That is not an attack on the government. That is not an attack on the bad guys. That is an attack on an entire people.
Okay, I'm gonna jump right into it. Let's go.
Well,
Okay, good day, everyone. We are here again with Sister Assal Rad. Assal hasn't been with us for a while now because Assal is very busy with her own book and other endeavors. But I have been really a nuisance. I've been whining in our WhatsApp all the time that I wanted to talk to Assal. So Assal, sorry for that annoying whining of mine, but I'm glad you're here. So welcome back.
no, thank you. I'm always happy to be here. But yes, I have been working on a book, so hopefully that'll be out later this year, and you'll see that there was a point in all of
Mm.
my. Let's do this in a little bit.
Can you give a little preview what the book's about?
I don't think for anybody who follows me, I don't think it's going to be very surprising if I say it's about the media's role in the Gaza genocide. So, will it's basically chronicling what I've covered, say, in social media, but I thought it was important to put it all in one place because, social media feeds, a story gets lost, a tweet gets lost,
Hmm.
feeds change very quickly. And so putting this in one place so that we could see, not, I don't think it's a question anymore of whether Israel has committed genocide, but more so how it was allowed to happen. And that's really what the book tries to tackle.
Hmm. And I'm curious. I always feel like having lived outside of the U.S. for so long, I'm kind of losing track of what's developing there. But could you just give us a brief update on the state of the anti-war movement in the U.S.? This time, the administration didn't do a whole, I don't know what it was, a 6 month propaganda campaign, maybe more last time, 9 months for the invasion of Iraq. So that also allowed the anti-war movement, I think, a little time to prepare. But do you see, are there protests? What's your sense of the feeling on the street, so to speak, there?
So there are a few things happening, I think, if you're looking at dynamics domestically in the US. I'm actually very surprised that we haven't had a lot of anti-war protests. Not that they're non-existent,
Hmm.
but if you go, what's really interesting is there's an inverse of public displays of protest versus public opinions about the war. If you look at the 2003 invasion of Iraq versus the current war with Iran, to your point, maybe part of it is that there was no real buildup. It was just sort of, we're going to do this now. Israel attacked them, and now we're going to do the same thing. And on top of that, there is somewhat, I think, almost a fatigue of protest. Right? There's so many reasons to be protesting in the United States right now. There was a lot of protest against ICE, and we saw how that turned out. At least two people killed in any attempt to protest. You have the ongoing genocide in Gaza, which, despite the fact that the media currently doesn't really want to talk about it, is still happening. Israel is expanding its occupation of Gaza. You have a war in Lebanon where Israel is ethnically cleansing the south of Lebanon and occupying it there. I mean, there's so much going on, so I think that's part of it. But if you go back to 2003, a majority of Americans supported the war, supported the invasion when it happened. And what was interesting about this is I actually saw, it was in the New York Times. They had a really interesting graphic, and I criticize the New York Times a lot, but when they do things good, nice to point it out. So there was this very interesting graphic that showed support for wars when the US, at the initial time that the US had entered the war, starting from like World War II and then coming down. And this is the first war where already from the very beginning, a majority are against it. That wasn't the case in Iraq, but you had these massive protests, not only in the US, but on a global scale. So I don't know. I mean, I wonder what you guys think about why we're not really seeing protests, despite the fact that a majority of Americans are against this war. And now, and I think this shift is actually really important to note because it's related, a majority of Americans now have a negative opinion of Israel, and that is unprecedented, especially given the amount of propaganda that the U.S., that the American public is exposed to. You know, the idea of Israel as an ironclad ally of the United States, I mean, starting to become a political liability. You actually have, what was it, the Senate voted, like, I think it was last week, about weapons to Israel. And oh, no, was it war powers or weapons to Israel? I think it was Israel, right? It was weapons to Israel. And 40 Democratic senators actually voted against, like voted for the resolution that was against giving some weapons package to Israel. And while it failed, it's still a huge 40 Democrats is huge in the US political system. So you're seeing those shifts, and that is related obviously to the war in Iran, because who started the war? I mean, you had Trump, I think it was today, that he came out and he wrote on Truth Social, I think the first sentence was something like, Israel didn't, I didn't enter this war because of Israel. Like, Israel didn't tell me to do this, which to me is the confirmation. Okay, so Israel told you to do this. That's why now you have to go on public record to deny it.
Yeah. Never believe anything until it has been officially denied.
I think I posted exactly that, by the way, that quote, because it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I think a lot of people in the United States and in the West in general are realizing that that public opinion is pretty much insignificant. And we've been protesting for 2 years. Millions of people went onto the streets before the Iraq war. Nothing happens. They really don't give a flying fuck. And I think even though you now see public opinion completely swayed against the war and against Israel, on the other hand, people realize it doesn't matter. And I think we have a serious issue here in Western so-called democracies where the opinion of the population is completely ineffectual. What do you think?
I mean, that to me is a huge question. And obviously, in the activist world, people have been arguing this for a very long time. Like, yes, we're deeply flawed democracy. The United States is a deeply flawed democracy. You could describe it that way. But at a certain point, because, the counter argument will be, well, it's a representative democracy. It's not a direct democracy. So it doesn't matter what the majority of Americans think, because the majority of Americans don't vote on every individual policy. I never liked that argument, because what's the point of a representative democracy if it doesn't represent what people want? Like, how is that? You may as well not have a representative democracy then, because it's not acting in that way. I wonder if, we're also looking at a very different generation of people becoming politically active. If you 23 years out from the invasion of Iraq, we're looking at a different landscape in how people protest. There was no social media in 2003. So there's a lot of, and that's why I'm saying the public opinion has shifted completely on a number of measures, including opinions of Israel, opinions about Palestinians. I mean, Iran specifically, if you're looking at the Iranian state, it has been a villain of American foreign policy for decades. And so it's fascinating to see how much the public is not in support of a war against their sort of number one villain. Whereas Israel was always the number one ally, the flip side of that coin was always that Iran had to be the number one villain. And all of that triangle, that way that those politics play out is designed that way. It's not a coincidence or an accident. It had to be that Iran was the number one foe and Israel was the number one ally, because what is one of the states that challenges Israel's hegemony in the region? Iran. but it couldn't, nobody could present it to the American public as, well, we have to, Iran is bad because it is a challenge to Israel as a hegemon in the region. That argument doesn't work. So the counter arguments are that it's an existential threat to the existence of Israel. Absurd on its face for very many reasons, given the fact that it's Israel that has nuclear weapons, not Iran. These are all things that the US public for a long time has had backwards. If you go back to polling in 2000, I think it's 21 or 22, Americans, more Americans believed that Iran had nuclear weapons, which it did not and does not, than believed that Israel had nuclear weapons, which it did and currently does.
Wow.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
the fact.
yeah, I think it is
Go ahead,
remarkable.
Peter.
The so many developments, the development in public opinion. I mean, this is what I would have hoped for in the early 2000s as the internet is starting to roll out. I would have hoped that the access to completely different perspectives on the world would have an impact like this, because once you get both, well, not both, but multiple perspectives on Israel, the counter argument, the counter hegemonic argument is just undeniably better. It's just superior. And so I was hoping that if you actually had a media system where people were exposed to that other perspective, undoubtedly it would be the counter hegemonic narrative that wins. It's just intrinsically stronger. But then, both of you have kind of expressed skepticism about the impact of public opinion. I think I think there's another piece of it that I'm not aware of, and I haven't read any analysis of it. But these protest movements, they don't just, contrary to the liberal imagination, they don't just kind of pop up out of nowhere and people just say, "Hey, I'm gonna go to Washington on this date." They're organized, and for the Iraq War, I think it was like the Answer Coalition, a whole bunch of groups in a coalition organizing those series of protests. I wonder if those organizations have been like whittled down over the years. If they haven't, I think that is probably part of the story, but it's just pure speculation on my part because I haven't read anyone doing an analysis of it. But if the top down part isn't a major part of the answer, then it could be like the bottom up, where people, and it's not just in the U.S. The Arab Spring protests, I think that probably resulted in a lot of disillusionment with pure protest as a way for people to exert power. And hopefully the lesson learned, I think this was what Vincent Bevins in the Jakarta method kind of hinted at the impotence of just pure protest, the pure liberal imagination of how politics works and how change is done, by interviewing people who were on more of that side, ideological side, during the Cold War in Latin America. And then afterwards, they're like, fuck, man, the Stalinists were right. The hardcore communists were correct. Like, we couldn't do that. We would just get crushed, murdered, destroyed by the US supported dictatorship. Maybe something like that is brewing, that people are, I mean, this is pure hopium. I'm just purely hoping that they're realizing that you need to be in a serious, disciplined organization in order to get anything done, and simply going outside in a protest is not going to do anything. I'll just say, in defense of the liberals, if we did have massive daily, if not weekly, or weekly, if not daily, protests in DC that were around the White House, and Trump's dumb little brain couldn't avoid this, he couldn't avoid this glaring evidence of how angry people were at him, given who he is, the narcissist and mentally damaged person he is, maybe protests would have more impact than for a regular president. I don't know.
Maybe you mean a daily no kings protest, so to speak, around the White House. But just to quickly jump in, and then I give it to you, Assal. I think the fact that we are now seeing burning factories popping up and Luigi Mangioni's is a symptom of a people that are not heard. And I think more is going to happen if the ruling classes are not listening. Sorry, Assal, go ahead.
No, I entirely agree. First of all, with that point, I think that that's a really important point, and that is also the difference with Gen Z. You see the reaction. I mean, if Okay, so a few things. There were so many things that you said, Peter, that I kept thinking. I'm like, oh, I want to say this. We don't have, specific analysis, but one thing you can point to, where like the center of protest starts traditionally in a country like the United States? Universities, not even in the United States, everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Universities.
Yep.
What happened to university protests in 2024? Not under the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
Not under the Trump administration, under the liberal Biden administration. They were crushed. Thousands of students were arrested. Students were expelled, suspended, lost scholarships, basically, many of which lost their potential future. You had what?
Blacklisted.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say you had like CEOs of companies coming out and saying, like, we should make a list and never hire these people. So there was a huge crackdown on protests because those protests were effective.
Mm.
One of the reasons why, because this got to my next point, is like you said, maybe uh, in my mind, protest that is not disruptive is something that a country like the United States will, of course, allow
Mm-hmm.
because that's the whole veneer of liberalism. It's the same way that the press operates as a quote free press. It's actually more pernicious because people do not realize they are limited, right? You can protest, you're free to do so, as long as it doesn't actually have any effect on the status quo or the policies. As soon as it starts to, that's when the suppression comes in. You can have a free press, you can say stuff if you want to say stuff, as long as it doesn't challenge power,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but that's what creates this illusion that we're living under, entirely free systems. What happens in protests, in campus protests, is they're cracked down because it's starting to shift public opinion. What happens to social media? Why do we have so much social media censorship now? Why are billionaires that happen to be aligned with Israel, why are they buying up social media and controlling it? Because it's where it's affecting public opinion. And for Gen Z, for young people, the ways of the politics of the past does not work. They understand this. It doesn't work. So they're becoming more tied to more militant notions of resistance. And again, this is not unique to the United States. I can use Iran as an example. Why protests in Iran were different in 2022 and 2023 during Women Life Freedom was because it was young people leading those protests. And so you're dealing with people who are no longer thinking things across the board, across the political spectrum in different countries. They're no longer thinking that the system works. We grew up in a generation that thought, okay, well, we'll vote
Mm-hmm.
and that'll fix it. We'll organize politically within the existing system and we can reform it. And more younger populations are coming to the conclusion that it is the system itself that is the problem.
Yeah.
So, if I can shift gears a little bit, but it is related, Assal. You, as an Iranian-American, I was wondering, how do you deal with what is going on now with the U.S. and Israel attacking part of your one of your mother countries? Let's say it that way. How do you deal with it? I would imagine that's very difficult. Like, I am half Dutch, half Algerian, and I've sometimes been thinking about it. Algeria is one of the few last standing, you could say, countries in the I almost wanted to say Middle East, North Africa sphere, but I hate these words. But you get what I mean. It's also it's also one of the few countries that does not have a U.S. military base, and a lot of gas. So I've always been thinking, when is it time coming, and if it comes, how painful that would be, to experience. So my question is more personal and psychological, emotional. Like, how does it feel for you, and how do you deal with that?
Growing up in the U.S., like I said, Iran has always been this like central villain. My, I was born in the U.S. in the '80s. My brother was a little bit older than me, and so like he, anglicized his name. He didn't go by his Persian name. Something that I think a lot of people of his generation did, because if you grew up in the U.S. in the '80s, Iran was basically the most hated state. right? Because of the hostage crisis, because of the revolution that had happened in '79, and we're not going to get into all of those details, but essentially, like, this is the environment that you grow up in, where this country, your country of heritage, is constantly vilified. And so there was always a fear. I think not just, and this is not something unique to me, in my peer group of people who are also Iranian American, we've always been scared. Like, this is what's going to happen. Eventually, the US and Iran, the US is going to go to war with Iran. This was always the big fear, because what you'll also see in the diaspora is that the vast majority of the diaspora still has ties to Iran. Like, my extended family lives in Iran. My people, it's really hard to talk about, actually. People I love, like, dearly, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, they live there. So I have been, as an American growing up in a country that's the heart of empire, when Gaza is being torn to shreds with US weapons, it's devastating for me. When it was happening in Iraq and Iran were at war in the 1980s, right? I don't have like a personal connection to the state of Iraq. And if I did, theoretically, it would be negative because of that background. I had none. I was against the war in Iraq because it was wrong. And so when you are an American, when your tax dollars and your weapons and your service members are dying themselves and killing other people, when you see this mass slaughter being carried out, not just in your name, but with your money, and simultaneously, that money is not being used, those resources are not being expended on Americans that need it. You see more and more Americans that cannot afford basic necessities, rents that go up, groceries, gas, all of these things. It's all devastating. When it starts to become, I had two occasions in which, in these last couple of months, where US and Israeli airstrikes were basically right around my aunt's house, like shaking her house. How? I don't know. I don't know how it's extremely difficult on a personal level. And I think of Palestinian Americans and Lebanese Americans and Iraqi Americans and Afghan Americans and all of these other groups of people who have also been affected by that. Because once, when I say we sort of knew that this was an inevitability, I mean, look back to the statement by Wesley Clark in, what was it, 2006 or 2007, when he talks about, there's this infamous interview on Democracy Now! Where he talks about 2 weeks after 9/11, there's a list of countries that they've come up with that they're going to attack, that they're going to go into eventually. And all of that list has been fulfilled. And what was at the end of the list? Iran. So it's almost surreal. It's this inevitability that you knew that it was going to happen. And it speaks so much to this inflated fake notion of a threat that was coming from Iran, and why you had to constantly talk about Iran's nuclear program, even though according to US intelligence, Iran has not pursued nuclear weapons, and that Iran will contest that. But I'm stating the official position of the United States intelligence community is that if Iran had a nuclear weapons program or was researching within the vicinity of that kind of a program, that was abandoned in 2003. I mean, who can think of what happened in 2003 that would make them abandon something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we know that threat does not actually exist. And yet, here we are, decades later, in our second, technically, war with Iran, because you had the US enter the June war last year as well. And last thing I want to mention about this also, there's this notion that US intervention in Iran has started with the bombing of the nuclear sites in June, or this particular war. US intervention in Iran has existed for decades. The economic warfare that has been conducted against Iran is not a coincidence. And if we're drawing parallels to Iraq, remember that Iraq was under sanctions for a decade it didn't collapse the Ba'athist party. It didn't take Saddam Hussein out of, it didn't collapse that system. But what it did is it impoverished ordinary Iraqis. And we can all remember, well, for those of us who don't remember, I'll remind us, the infamous interview with Madeleine Albright,
Mm-hmm.
when she was asked, is it worth it? The sanctions, right? Not war. Is it worth it if these statistics are true, that 500,000 children have been killed as a result of sanctions. And her response, I don't think anybody was surprised, was, well, of course we think it's worth it. They're not our children.
Yeah, the price of getting rid of someone we don't like is worth 500,000 children's lives.
Someone we don't like who we supported.
Oh, right. We don't like anymore. Sorry. Yeah.
Key concept. Someone we don't like. I remember George W. Bush, when he was leading up to the invasion, when he was talking about how evil Saddam was, one of the things he cited was Saddam's chemical attacks against Iran in the 1980s. Guess who helped him with those?
Mm-hmm.
It's just wild to cite the very thing that you supported as the very reason why now you have to take this person out. So, I mean, that's...
Yeah. I do suspect that part of the reason why they didn't go with the whole propaganda campaign, is that they probably tried focus grouping all of their ideas and found that nothing worked. I mean, they're just... Again, in the internet age, you try pulling what Bush did back in 2002, 2003, and everyone just starts searching for, not everyone, but some people are going to start searching some of this stuff. And then they're going to tell their friends and family, this is insane. He's, anyhow. Another thing you just mentioned, and we should just highlight it as one of the very probable reasons why there isn't a massive protest movement right now, in addition to all the other reasons we just discussed. The economic situation for the vast majority is far worse today than it was back in 2002, 2003. And when you're focused on just keeping a roof over your head and food in your kids' mouths, God forbid, the political world might as well be on another planet. You're focused on the immediate concerns.
That's true of everywhere, by the way. And that's an enormously important point. And that is true of everywhere. Because remember, we were saying for protests to work, they have to be disruptive. Mm-hmm. It's not just, we're going to go on Saturday afternoon. And I'm not, this is coming off as if I'm criticizing people who do this. I'm not at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not an important component. But if that's all we're doing, it's not going to work. You need strikes, you need boycotts, you need disruption you need economic disruption.
Yeah.
Without that, I mean, that's basically our, as the population that is objecting to something, that's our greatest leverage is to use the fact that the consumer is in fact the one in charge of the, you can target a sector or a company or something in order to show the power of the consumer. And that's not what we've been doing. Certainly people can't afford to go on strikes.
But you have a serious dilemma there, because, Peter, people are struggling. But on the other hand, if people are not struggling, then they are too comfortable to go onto the streets and protest. I mean, I think there is this weird kind of intersection between struggling and protesting, where people are where things are so bad that they finally hit the streets or do something really, really disruptive. And I think you are seeing the first signs right now. Like I said, when you get these people who start to burn factories and even do it while filming themselves. So that means the fear to be caught, the fear to be punished is disappearing. And I think that is a very important aspect. It reminds me of those days you were talking about the Arab Spring protests. I remember in Egypt, that stuff was harrowing, man. I remember that people were protesting and that you literally saw the sniper lasers onto their chests. And nobody went away, and they were shot down like domino blocks, one after the other. And people just kept standing and protesting. That means they are at such a point of desperation that, the fear isn't stopping them anymore. And I think that is the point where things become really, really disruptive.
I think they become different.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's. I see your point, and I mean, if you look at, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought, one of the central ideas within that Marx had was that these proletariat revolutions would happen in fully industrialized countries. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't happen amongst an agrarian population, which is actually exactly where it happened. If you look at Cuba, if you look at China, if you look at like imperial Russia. So there was the idea, and I think that plays into kind of what you're talking about, Kareem, but I actually think they manifest differently. I think that's part of what happens, because in other cases, when you actually have, a healthy middle class, on one hand, you're thinking, well, but if you have a healthy middle class, people aren't as angry. But they also have the means, they have some means to protest. So I think when you're in a state of desperation, it might lend itself to more, a different form of protest. And that's the difference, right? It's not that they won't do it, it's that they'll do it differently. When you have a middle class, maybe you can participate in things like strikes and boycotts more easily. That's where you're focused. But when you're desperate, you're burning down factories, to your point, which is a completely different way of disrupting.
Yeah, yeah, and in all of those examples of successful revolutions, it wasn't just a bunch of mass protests that did it. It was parties, organizations, really disciplined organizations. Like in China, it was an army. It was a revolutionary, literally army, hierarchical, top down. People take orders, they follow orders, they do what they're told, and that's how a considerable number of people, but nowhere near a majority of the population, can actually accomplish really massive things. If it's just a bunch of disorganized, disaggregated individualists, doing their own thing, yeah, then you do need a majority. But yeah.
No, that's a really good point too, and that, I think, it also points to the difference when if you have to have an organized movement, not just a protest movement. It's almost like they're not the same thing. Just protesting alone because protest a lot of times can be sparked by an event or condition that angers people and brings people to the street. But whether or not that's going to A, last, or B, turn into meaningful change, that's where, to Peter's point, that's where the organizing is so important.
That's George Floyd a few years ago. Cream, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Good point, Peter, about the George Floyd protest. So I have another question for you, Assal, vis-a-vis Iran. So where do you now... Okay, we had, of course, the whole ceasefire collapsing again. Surprise, surprise, with two of these psychopaths running two of these depraved armies. Where do you see it heading? We had recently a panel with two of our favorite journalists, Kit Clarenberg and Matt Kennard, both from the UK. And yesterday also with one of our favorite guests, Aaron Good. And all of them said the same thing. They said either Iran resists successfully and actually saves us, the world, from one of the most darkest ages probably that is coming for humanity, if US empire in combination with Israel also topple Iran, and then it is almost total control of these guys with regard to the world that we are in now. And we have seen how dark that kind of world is. We've seen what these people are capable of, from genocide to Epstein to you name it. It's to completely eradicating our freedoms. It's very, very scary. So my question is, Iran. My question is, Assal. Iran, where do you see this heading, and how do you also perceive this battle? Do you also see it in very grand terms? Because I do agree with them. I also see this in a very almost binary idea of good versus evil. It's very hard to see it in a different way.
I love these predictive questions, and I'm being sarcastic because I hate them. I always say this: I can't predict what's going to happen because I don't think anybody can. And I'm going to push back a little bit and say, or if I was to predict, I would say I don't think either of those things are going to happen. Mostly because I think that sort of clean binary is a bit hyperbolic for the situation. And I'm not criticizing you. I know that this is a way that people have thought about it, because when you're looking at the current situation, if you're looking at it strictly through, an anti-imperialist lens, then that's how you're going to see it. You're going to see Iran as a country that is a sovereign nation. Its sovereignty has been, you know, violated repeatedly for, you know, not months, not years, not decades, but centuries. You know, so you're, and this is not unique to that country. It's something you can talk about for the region as a whole. So when you look at it through strictly that lens, I can see why people would break it down that way. But to describe it as good versus evil, well, you know, the Iranian government, not the best, not the best in a lot of ways, especially against its own people. And I think that's something that I always push back on, because it sort of leaves it leaves that part of it out. And I don't think you can completely omit that fact when you're talking about it. That being said, the reason I'm saying I think it'll be something in between is less so the nuance of understanding it, and more so I don't think that's just going to go that cleanly. You know, I don't think you're going to see the sort of collapse of the United States and by extension Israel in not in the immediate future. Certainly not the United States. I think Israel, the wild card that is Donald Trump, is he's the only president I could possibly say that I would even give a minuscule chance that he would actually turn on Israel. And that's because he has no political ideology. If he sees, you know, that's why you see in this commentary recently, well, Israel didn't make me do this. Yesterday, he had another one that said, you know, whether or not you like Israel, they're our greatest ally. He's aware, you know, he doesn't have to have protesters outside of the White House, because there's something he pays attention to a lot more. That's social media and what's happening in the public sphere. He's listening to what's happening. He doesn't even have to listen that hard. It's his own supporters. You have people. Why is he attacking people like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens? Like, why is he going after all these people? Because he's listening to what they're saying. He's seeing it. And there's definitely, all of that divide is very clear, and it doesn't have to be physically in front of the White House for him to be aware of that. And on the flip side, I don't think you're also going to just see the collapse of Iran. I also think that that's an exaggeration of, not an exaggeration, I just don't think it's that simple. I mean, the United States was in Afghanistan for the longest war that the US has ever been in, and we replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. This is not a joke. This is very serious. Like, the idea that you're just going to topple something and get rid of it is not the reality that we live in. I don't have an example. I always ask, I'm like, what's the example? When did this happen? So Iran is very different. Iran, under this government, is in a much more secure position, not secure overall, but as comparatively to the Taliban in Afghanistan or Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist government in Iraq in 2003. It's not the same situation. And that's why we're seeing it play out so differently. The fact that, you know, if you look at what's happened with the Strait of Hormuz, the economic fallout, how Iran has been able to retaliate throughout the region, hitting U.S. assets, as well as retaliating against Israel, some people are shocked. Not if you knew anything about Iran. You wouldn't be shocked. The assumption was that Iran was entirely weak, because this is an Orientalist trope too, right? Iran is simultaneously on the brink of collapse and the most powerful entity in the world. Like, Iran is doing everything, not only in the region, but in the world. Protests in America, that's Iran. It's wild. The amount of power and weakness is attributed to it at the same time. So that's what I mean when I say, but it's typically something in between, right? They are not all powerful at all. Iran is a country that's been under US sanctions, which has decimated its economy, destroyed the middle class. It cannot respond in kind. It simply does not have the power to do so. But it can do some things. They've just restrained themselves from doing so, because the idea from the Iranian side was strategic patience. It was, we're not going to escalate because we understand, they understand this from their point of view. They understand that there is a massive asymmetry of power, whether it's economic or conventional war. What they're good at is asymmetric war. And that's what they've shown that they are able to do, that they've just not done up until now. Why? What is the logic behind it? It's so interesting that for some sort of pundits, the commentary is always, this is an irrational, crazy, fanatic state. And yet they have responded. You can go all the way back to 2018 to when the US leaves the JCPOA under Trump 1.0. What was the Iranian response? Nothing. It was nothing for a full year. For a full year, Iran abided by the deal, hoping that the Europeans would be able to fulfill the economic relief that was promised to Iran for the limitations of its civilian, legal nuclear program. That didn't happen. They started to slowly not, I don't want to use the word violate because the deal was essentially null once Iran got no benefits and no relief from it. But they started to reduce I'm at a loss of words, their adherence to the deal over time. What happened when Soleimani was assassinated? Iran had a telegraphed attack. Everybody knew because they didn't want anybody to die. They didn't want to escalate. But they could say, look, we retaliated, but there's no escalation. It ends here. What happened when Iran was attacked multiple times by Israel? Same thing, over and over and over again. What they got was more and more escalation until this war now, where from the very beginning, I mean, what happened on, I think it was the first or second day, within hours of the war beginning, an elementary school was bombed and over 150 children were slaughtered. So from the very beginning, they responded in kind because that strategic patience clearly did not work. And what's interesting is
well, not even in kind, Assal. They will not bomb a school a school with children.
That's a good point. When I meant, you're right. I didn't mean in kind. I used a poor choice of words. I didn't mean to imply that they were hitting, they clearly did not hit an elementary school anywhere. But my point was more that they responded with significantly more force than they basically went up the escalation ladder rather than immediately trying to de-escalate, which is what they've done repeatedly over now many, many years. Mm-hmm. They went right up the escalation ladder with the US and Israel. That was the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just hope it's not more like a Vietnam situation where, in the end, yes, Vietnam won. They incredibly beat three empires actually, but at the cost of years and years of bloodshed, millions dead. I would just hope that is something that we in the imperial core or people with citizenship in the imperial core, the U.S. and its various European allies, will organize, be disciplined, and put enough pressure or actually capture state power, ideally, so that we put an end to this mass murder.
Absolutely.
Well, the only thing that might prevent it is clearly not, it has nothing to do, it's not moral clarity, it's not international law. We've seen that, be shattered completely in Gaza. It's that Iran has the ability to exact an economic cost on the globe. That's the only reason why so that's one factor that's different, right? The difference is Iran, because of its geography and nothing else, because of its geography, has the ability to create economic costs. And it's a question of which side is more willing to absorb costs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at this point between the US and Iran, I feel like there's a little bit of a game of chicken going on, and it's not the best because on the American side, there's also a difference. The US has weapons in its arsenal, as we all know, that can essentially destroy an entire country. This is the first time that I can remember feeling like that's actually a possibility. That's actually a risk. And not because I'm making it up, but because the President of the United States literally threatened verbatim to destroy a civilization, not a government, not a country, a civilization. Okay, there's no confusion. Civilization includes its people. That's what a civilization is. For it to never return. The words of the United States president. So the fear is not coming out of some kind of paranoia. I'm just following what's being said by the most powerful man in the world.
Yeah, and it's pretty sad when the hopeful thing is, I hope the officer class refuses to follow that order. Like, if your hope is in the officer class of the U.S. military, that's.
Well, yeah. Well, I do want to. So what you're saying is also when it comes to you were talking about Iran engaging in strategic patience and in the United States being so so irrational, actually. No, not even irrational, just a terrible negotiating partner on purpose. And the problem is that the countries around the world do not have any narrative power or narrative dominance because of US power in the sphere of media. I think I always get back to that. It's such a problem because whatever Iran does, calmness, negotiations, it doesn't matter. US uses its media to make Iran seem like the bad guy. And I always keep saying the world needs to get the hell off of Western media. Get your information sovereignty. It's so incredibly important because our brains are constantly being colonized. And one more thing I wanted to say on the whole good versus evil binary. I totally agree with you there, Assal. To be honest, I think there are no good governments in the world. I really think they don't exist. And I totally agree with the fact that also Iran has its own internal problems, and that is something for the Iranian people to, of course, decide what to do with that. What I'm trying to say is that, and in all fairness, I think also that Matt Kennard and Kit meant this, is that at least the Iranians are on the side of humanity. And I totally agree with that. The Iranians have stood up for the Palestinians. Let's be very honest here. I also think that the Iranians still have shown that kind of restraint that you also see among the Arab resistance to not harm citizens on purpose, even though the United States and Israel are massively bombing innocent citizens, the most gruesome things. So I think a better way to say is that the binary we are seeing right now is either a world that still has a conception of humanity, you could say, and no, however imperfect it is, versus a totally lawless, rapist, genocidal, murderous, psychopathic Epstein class that is literally beyond any darkness I've ever seen in my life. And I do think we are seeing that battle right now because these guys just want Iran to fall, to have no more resistance. You know what I mean? I hope that makes it a bit more clear.
No, it does, and that's what I'm saying. It's complicated for someone like me because I'm looking at it from, like I said, I'm looking at it from a different perspective. And so the response would be when you say, they don't hurt innocent people, the response would be they hurt their own people, and their own people are innocent people, and they do. And the I think I understand what you mean in that what happens is when you've been exposed. I knew that Iran was not evil, like that. This was not surprising to me. The idea of Iran being evil, even just the notion of evil, was absurd always. I know the nuances of its political system, the fact that the government and its people are not a monolith. Those are none of those things. Like, I don't need to humanize Iranians. It's my actual family. So I didn't have to go through those steps. But I think from a Western perspective, and this has not just happened with Iran, but we saw it happen with Palestine as well, is when you have been propagandized just decade after decade after decade that these people, Muslims and Arabs, are evil. They're trying to get you. They want you to, they're trying to bring the caliphate to America. Like, these are the things that they want to develop nuclear weapons so they can destroy Israel and destroy Europe. This is the hyperbole that they have been told over and over again. I mean, one of the most disgusting things that is an Israeli talking point is when they say things like, oh, we wish that Palestinians loved their children as much as they hated Jews. Like, the most disgusting things that are said, but they're said over and over again, that when people in the Western world saw, wait, they're acting like normal people. They care that their children are being killed. They're these men who have been terrorists, who've been turned into caricatures, are just ordinary people. They cry, they hug and embrace their families. Like, this has been shocking to many people in the Western world only because they didn't know. They didn't know this is what it's like. So in the same sense, it's like the Iranian government has been presented as this evil boogeyman in such an exaggerated way that when you hear an official talk, when they hear the foreign minister Abbas Araghchi speak, and they're like, well, I mean, something he says makes sense. Some of the things he's saying make sense. That in and of itself becomes shocking to this side. And I'm not talking about you or any of the analysts, but the way that the Western world has responded. All I'm saying, all I want to be careful about is that, and I think you made the most important point. What happens in Iran is up to Iranians. I don't comment on, Palestinian politics. I don't comment on the Palestinian Authority because that's for Palestinians to decide. But what I want to be careful about, and especially in my language, and that's because of the position I hold, right? As someone who knows, if my cousin in Iran is telling me this government has done X, Y, and Z to me, to our people, X, whatever it is, I can't dismiss that and valorize them and say they're the heroes of the story. All I think is that they're clearly not, in the context of this war, they are not the bad guys of the story. That is true because they were not the ones who were attacking anyone. They were not threatening anyone. They were attacked. And it wasn't the government that was attacked. It was Iran. Iran's soil is sovereign. Once that soil is attacked, it is an attack on its entire people. There are innocent civilians being killed. An elementary school was bombed, hospitals, other schools, UNESCO sites, bridges, oil fields, gas fields. Those are all civilian infrastructure. That is not an attack on the government. That is not an attack on the bad guys. That is an attack on an entire people. And in this case, they are not allowed, they have the right, this sentence seems to be familiar to people, they have the right to defend themselves. Iran has the right to self-defense, let's just say that, because it does. As does Lebanon, as does Syria, as does every country, but we only hear one country. We only ever hear that phrase applied or used. We don't even hear about it for the US. Have you ever heard someone say the US has the right to defend themselves? I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard France has a right to defend itself? How is it possible that only one country on the planet has this catchphrase? Because it's the country
or a right to exist,
occupying, attacking, and slaughtering not only Palestinians who are indigenous to the land, but its neighbors.
Or a right to exist. I mean, which state has a right to exist? I mean, how many states have been carved up by the United States and turned into new states? I mean, not ever was there a state that had a right to exist.
And technically, no state has a right.
Indigenous people have a right to self-determination. That's the right.
Yeah.
Indigenous people have a right
to exist. People have a right to self-determination. People have a right to defend themselves. States don't have the right to exist. No state. Zero states. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there was something that you just said, Assal, and I was like, okay, I need to... Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, happy I remember it. Otherwise, I get frustrated.
But do let us know if you have to go. Absolutely. I know we're a little over your time.
Yeah.
Well, let's end on Kareem's point.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say that this discussion, indeed, what you're saying, Assal, about it, this is part of the Iranian people themselves, and no government is perfect. Yeah, Peter and I have often these discussions also, for example, about China. You know, like people act like China is perfect and it's all the anti-imperialist and this and that. But China has its own serious domestic issues as well. And that is up to the Chinese to deal with. Russia, same story. The Netherlands, the same story. And of course, also the Palestinian resistance or Hezbollah or whatever, they also have their issues. And I think it is indeed not our position from the imperial core to start lecturing on how they conduct their politics. I've never ever done that about Chinese domestic politics. What I do critique China on, for example, is what are they doing in the international realm that impacts all of us. I think we can have an opinion on that. It's the same with Russia, it's the same with the West, it's the same with Iran. What are they doing internationally right now that is impacting all of us? And in my opinion, what they're doing right now is indeed standing on the side of humanity, you know? And this is a bit of the way I see it.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
And because I think you made a really good point. This is always the way when we when we talk about something as analysts, there's two angles. One is the domestic, which is whatever domestic population you are, right? It's much harder to talk about domestic populations and issues within another country, but you can speak from your own perspective. And the other is international because that affects all of us, right? Like that's a completely different situation, and that's why absolutely, yeah. There's in my mind just zero question to the fact that this is an illegal war carried out by the United States and Israel, just like the war in Iraq was illegal. It wasn't because I had special affections for Saddam Hussein. It had nothing to do with that. Again, and I will emphasize this, part of the reason why my parents immigrated outside of Iran and I was born in the United States is because Iran was under attack by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. There was a war. They're basically war refugees, right? They left because of a war. So it's not because of an affection I had for Saddam Hussein, but as an American, it was an affection I had for a concept, at least, of international law. It was the belief, naively, that those things meant something. And so when you see that, it's a combination of seeing those things be deteriorated, but also with the level of hypocrisy. The fact that I am not saying, it's these clean cut good guys and bad guys, but they have been saying it the whole time for centuries. They still tell you those people are savages. We're not. We're the civilized Western world. All the while, we're, just genociding a hemisphere, building wealth through murder and slavery, and colonizing the rest of the living world. So it's that being torn apart and broken down. And I think it lends itself to this sort of like underdog mentality that people have. And that's why the global South reacts in the way that they do. And now even in the Western world, people react the way that they do when states, whatever those states are, stand up to that kind of power. Because that kind of power is asymmetric to begin with. And they're the ones doing it. Like it's when, look, the influence is not in the opposite direction. The power is not in the opposite direction. If you want to understand why the states in the region are the way that they are, you cannot simply look at themselves. That's a huge part of it, but they have been impacted by foreign interference for centuries. You cannot understand it without understanding that history, without understanding those root causes. In the case of the powerful nations, it's their choice.
Yeah.
They are not being influenced. Well, I don't want to forget the powerful lobbies, but they are not being intervened in the same way because of those power dynamics, which are at the core of these conversations, or at least should be, if you really want to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Amen. And just last question, most importantly, if you're in the US or perhaps of organizations elsewhere, maybe Europe, we're speaking in English here. Where do you donate either money or hours of your life? Time or money?
In the United States. There's a lot of different organizations, I would say, that are, there are, the thing that's tricky about the US is so many countries that you would want to donate things to are sanctioned.
Right.
And so
for Iran,
enough,
I found that you can
we're
donate
not allowed
to
to.
International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. You're not allowed to donate directly to the Iranian Red Cross, but if you donate to that they have
exactly. So there are institutions. There are some, nonprofits within the U.S. that you are allowed to give. But I always think that these on the institutional level, even for instance, UNRWA, right? UNRWA is something that's an important entity that has helped Palestinians for all this time. And when they're being attacked and their funding is being attacked by governments like the United States, it actually does help to help at these institutional levels. And especially as an American, there isn't the same sort of risk of what would happen if you donated, because unfortunately, there's that if you're in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Well, at least there's that. There's the International
The
Federation.
UN is still fine, though, I think. Like exactly, like the Red Crescent, the International Red Cross, like these massive organizations are still fine.
All right, well, thank you.
I also think, sorry, on if you're talking about like donations, especially in the case of, I guess Gaza is the one that I would want to say. there's a lot of individual people who have their own like sort of but it's not GoFundMe anymore because GoFundMe stopped funding them, but I think it's usually through like chuff.org. So they have their own campaigns, and sometimes those individual campaigns are very, very helpful too to help people who are on the ground.
Yeah, I always find it so difficult to distinguish which one are legit and which not. Do you have any advice for that, Assal? I find it very difficult.
I completely understand, and that's why I said I'm like, if people are hesitant, obviously you can go with the much bigger sort of institutions and organizations, but I find in my personal case, like there are people who I've followed now for a long time in Gaza. They post all the time. I've seen their own videos of themselves, conversed with them, and so I feel more comfortable doing it that way. To everybody, it's up to the individual. I don't want to sort of lead anyone into a direction because I obviously also don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. It was great talking with you. Always a pleasure.
Same.
And hope we
It was nice seeing you guys.
Thanks, Assal.
Hope we can do it again
It's
soon.
been a while.
And good luck on your book, by the way. Hopefully that's coming along well, and very much looking forward to it.
It is. It should be out in September, and we can always, have another
Yes.
conversation closer to.
Definitely.
Oh, I'm expecting more this year, Assal. Come on.
One for each chapter.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't that many chapters, so that's not bad.
Excellent.
But it was really great seeing you guys.
Likewise. Have a good one.
Yes.
You too.
Have a good day.
Okay.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a good rest of your day.
All right.
Yes.
Hugs
See
to
ya.
everyone I know
Bye-bye.
out there in Cali.
I will. Okay. Bye.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. BettBeat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change. No silence.